make a convincing case that it's us that are responsible for the alternative comics movement, and on a broader level, the graphic novel form that's become so popular and fulfilled all of our lives. So I'm going to suggest that this movement began in the Northwest when a trio of very gifted cartoonists emerged from the Evergreen State College in about 1977. You'll recognize some of these people. This is, who is this again? Yeah, I know, you guys know who this is. This is Matt Groening, who later went on to The Simpsons fame. He came out of Evergreen with Lynda Barry, this is some of her work, and Charles Burns. All of them, the three of these people sort of laid the foundation for what we've come to understand as alternative comics. We're pleased to have Cathy Hillenbrand here from the Real Comet Press. In the late 70s and early 80s, she owned a tavern that still exists up on Capitol Hill called the Comet Tavern. And that was sort of a gathering place for a lot of Capitol Hill cognoscenti and intellectuals, artists, and writers. This is a matchbook that she had. She had a matchbook contest. I remember this. I might have even entered it. Lynda Barry one, and she produced these rather ubiquitous Comet Tavern matchbooks that were everywhere until I wanted to show them about a year and a half, and then I couldn't find them anywhere. I got these from Alaska, thanks to Cathy. So I'm gonna ask Cathy to talk just a little bit about how it went from the Comet Tavern to her publishing empire, the Real Comet Press. And you know, Cathy's sort of often overlooked, but her work, she was doing this simultaneously with Francois Moulet and Art Spiegelman doing Raw magazine, and a little later I'll provide material that suggests that we were way ahead of that Raw curve. But I'm going to turn this over to Cathy now for just some remarks on the early 80s.
Some remarks on the early 80s. Well, you know, what's interesting is that I fell into this because I was really interested in the relationship of image and text, which is a little bit different concept from comics. I mean, comics are one element of that, but it was kind of a different thing I was interested in exploring. But when I started to publish, I'd done some work with a woman who's a performance artist and a writer here, and then when I decided I wanted to have a publishing company that dealt with what happens, this is germane to the Northwest Noir, is like what happens in the Northwest. I felt like Seattle was an interesting place because there was very interesting work, various kinds of visual art being done in Seattle, and also Seattle was a place where really well-known artists from all across the country and around the world came and did, you know, performances in music and exhibitions at this place called Andor, which was an artist-run space around the corner from the Comet Tavern. And there were two women, one of whom had gone to Evergreen, who owned a bookstore in Belltown called Art and Form. And they're like, Cathy, you should publish Lynda's work, because she had started making little books of her own, and she had a strip that was in the Seattle Sun, predecessor of the Weekly, much better paper. And so we did Girls and Boys, and it was just this huge whirling success. I mean, it sold out like in 3 or 4 months, and all of a sudden it's like, how many copies do you make? You know, we did like 6,000 copies or something, and then how many more do you make, et cetera, et cetera. And I'd had this funny connection with Lynda previously because she'd won this contest for the matchbook at the tavern, and her prize was a dinner. I don't know if any of y'all have been to the Comet, but there's a balcony at the top of the Comet. And in the 70s, people used to go up there and smoke pot, and it was called the Cloud Room. And then the cops shut it down. So we kept like cases of wine and things up there. So we gave her and her best friend, Connie Dahl, who's an artist here in Seattle, and they had adjoining studios on Capitol Hill. They had a dinner at the Comet in the balcony, and they were served like something like angels on horseback made in the toaster oven. I mean, it was really crude. But that was sort of the beginning of this relationship I had with Lynda for a number of years. And so I ended up publishing comics, But I kind of backed into it because it wasn't the place I started. I come to this, or came to this in a really different way from Eric and Gary at Fantagraphics. So I don't know, that's about all I can say on that topic at the moment.
Wait a second, I have a question.
Your way is way cool.
Yeah, I did want to mention some of the other publications. I think she's being a little self-deprecating.
Wait.
Go ahead.
What's Angels on Horseback?
Oh, it's oysters wrapped in bacon. Broiled.
I'll take 2 orders. Cathy was responsible for publishing the work of another gifted cartoonist, Michael Dugan, who had a very strong influence on a lot of cartoonists. He's sort of been forgotten in the recent past, but I think Ellen might even be able to address that. As well as Art Chantry, who this was a collection of punk rock posters he dubbed Instant Litter, and I just think it was so precious and wonderful of art, and Cathy did think that this work was worth saving somehow, because otherwise it would be lost to the fluttering litter of time. And this included a lot of artists and musicians that laid the foundation for the international youth movement we would later dub grunge. Lamentably, out of the Seattle Sun came up a publication called The Rocket. It was a monthly insert in the Seattle Sun that focused on music and comics. This is a single issue. I just want to flip through real quick, a single issue of The Rocket. Covered by Lynda Barry. You can see the original drawing for this, by the way, at Fantagraphics Bookstore. Inside, Robert Crumb and Harvey Picar, amongst others. Our friend Charles Burns, Gary Panter, Matt Groening, Peyton Wilkinson. The list just goes on. It's just it was just a phenomenal publication. That this is one issue. This isn't even the whole issue, but a very important aspect of the Northwest. They allowed a lot of these artists. They nurtured a lot of these artists and publicized not just the cartoons, but a lot of the graphic designers. That so many of these graphic designers went on to work with Cathy and Fantagraphics Books, like Dale Yarger, Mark Michaels, and Bob Newman, Art Chantry, and others. I did mention Raw magazine, and I thought that it was important to note that on the cover of this Raw magazine, Raw #4, which was about the time that Raw magazine had sort of penetrated pop culture, nationally, Art Spiegelman sort of had in mind to elevate comics to the level of fine art and high literature, which was fine. But this is obviously a cover by Charles Burns, and you'll notice the little cutaway on the bottom left is Reid speaks for himself by a cut-up artist and author and critic named Doug Kahn, who Cathy also published his work, Doug Kahn. I have a letter here if anybody wants to look at it, from Art Spiegelman to Bruce Pavitt, who had Sub Pop. Oh. All right. Sub Pop. This is the first issue of Sub Pop. Sub Pop, we know, was a record label. Nirvana, Grunge, Soundgarden, and all that stuff. It started as a fanzine. This is issue #1. The cover, sorry for the fuzzy cover, done by, this is done by Lynda Barry. It became a cassette fanzine. This is the original art from Sub Pop #5 that included that track, Doug Kahn, Reagan Speaks for Himself. It's sort of a denigrating mashup of Ronald Reagan being Ronald Reagan. And it was, this predated the presence of Charles Burns in Raw magazine. That's not to suggest that Art Spiegelman wasn't a very important character in sort of promoting this alternative comics genre. Of course, he was exceedingly important and a bona fide genius, but he wasn't working alone, and he was, this really did, I think a convincing case again could be made that this came out of the Northwest. At about the same time, a couple of artists moved to Seattle, relocated from Seattle, about the time that these other artists had wandered away. Charles Burns ended up in Philadelphia. Lynda Berry, left for greener pastures. I'm not sure what happened to Matt Groening, but he's around somewhere, I'm sure. Peter Bagge moved to Seattle, and interestingly enough, he moved here because his brother-in-law had landed a job as a starting tight end for the Seattle Seahawks. Later to be the, who knew? Well, that brought Peter out. They were starting a family, and Joanne had this one idea about the Northwest being not Noir. But at the time, Peter, aside from doing neat stuff and other great comic books, he was editing our Crumb's Weirdo magazine. You see the cover here, and he was able to recruit a lot of local artists like Lynda Berry, Lynda Berry, and Michael Dugan, and a number of other artists, Ashley Talbot, and get them more national exposure through Weirdo magazine. It's sort of interesting that both Crumb and Art Spiegelman were sort of trying to drag underground comics into this new era, and each with their own unique approach and sort of conflicting approaches, whereas Art Spiegelman wanted to elevate comics to being considered fine art. Crumb, while not necessarily hostile to the idea, didn't really give a shit about people. He embraced comics as sort of the disposable medium that it was, and most artists, most cartoonists didn't really care about any of this high concept stuff. They just wanted to get their work out and get paid for it. Peter Bagge arrived at a time when the alternative music in Seattle was really starting to take hold, and I think Peter had a lot to do with formulating, he wasn't just satirizing that grunge movement, he helped formulate the attitudes and aesthetics of grunge. And I often equate Seattle in the late 80s and early 90s to San Francisco in the mid-60s with the hippie movement there. They each had their own music and graphic sensibility, anti-fashion statements, and not coincidentally, they had each had a cadre of very accomplished cartoonists to chronicle those movements, the respective movements. At about the same time, well, just a little before Pete arrived in Seattle, our friend Jim Woodring arrived from in the Northwest from Southern California. And I'm gonna sort of, I use this image to sort of introduce it because this is the beloved character Pup Shop. And I think Jim once told me he was inspired by a tavern, and the tavern seemed to be a recurring theme here, in Everson, Washington, where he moved to sort of inspired this character, an old radio, as I recall. I'm going to turn this over to Jim.
Well, yeah, when I was an adolescent living in Los Angeles, I read that book, The Egg and I, by Betty McDonald, and her descriptions of the Olympic Peninsula made me want to live here. She made it sound bleak and lonely and hostile to human life, and I thought that's where I want to be. So as soon as I could, which was 1974, I moved up to the little town of Everson, which is north of Bellingham. At the time was a cannery town, which is now a mini mall town. And there was a great old tavern there, and they had this clock sitting up on a high shelf that looked a lot like that character. And I actually did a little drawing of it, which I found later on, and gave it animal characteristics, and it became her. Her, it's a girl. And, you know, I've lived up and down the West Coast, but I like it here best. I like it here because it's somewhat backwards. You know, you go out at night and you don't see a million beautiful women in short black skirts marching around, which is a bad thing in a certain way, but it's also makes me comfortable to be here. So I just, I like Seattle, and I like this part of the world, and I do think it's haunted.
Jim isn't without his connections to the local music scene either. I thought I'd put this up real quickly. It's a collaboration with Jim Woodring and Grammy Award-winning improvisational jazz guitarist Bill Frisell. Though Jim sort of had a different approach than Peter and some of the other artists. It's worth noting that Jim also had a close association with the local music scene, and I think Jim's approach was a little, I don't know if it's more sophisticated is quite the word, but it was just different. And I found it fascinating to watch Jim's earlier work go from being heavily text-oriented to the point where he had several of his longer stories were text-only, just about, or maybe illustrated text, to his more recent work that's characterized by the complete absence, the total absence of any text at all. I think, as I recall, there were some literary artists that were a little bit upset with Jim because he won the Stranger Genius Award in Literature without using a single word. So, God bless you, Jim, that speaks highly of our medium. And I thought maybe Jim could just sort of, this is a little off topic, but just sort of describe that process where he went to wordless comics like this page here.
Well, you know, I never intended to be a cartoonist. I wanted to be sort of a diarist, a self-expressing fine artist, and I had self-published this little thing, you would call it a zine now. At the time that title didn't exist, it was 1980. And a friend of mine who I was working with at the time, Gil Kane, a great American cartoonist who was good friends with Gary Groth, introduced me to Gary, and Gary saw a copy of my book and he said, "There's no comics in this, I only publish comics, but if you'll put some comics in it, I'll publish it." And I said, "Sure," you know, so that's how I became a cartoonist. It was never an intention of mine. I'm really an opportunist. Yeah, you know, Gary's a hell of a guy. He really just does what he loves, and that's the criteria for his work, and that's rare and magnificent. He was willing to publish my comics, even though he'd never seen any by me, and had no reason to think I could do any. No, just because he liked my sensibility. He trusts his instincts, and that's what makes him great.
It's worth noting too that these the last book you saw, Weathercraft and Congress of the Animals, were both nominated for the prestigious Los Angeles Book Prize. So hopefully he'll win $5 million and give me some of it.
Oh, I will.
I'm holding my breath. There's Jim. I couldn't resist using this. This was actually on the image from the cover page of the KOW website this morning, coincidentally, because I did this about 3 o'clock last night, hours before we appeared on the radio. And I just, you know, this again is a little off topic, but I think it's, you know, I've never really asked Jim why the hell you did this. What possessed you?
You need a shtick, you know, you need to have some kind of an audience grab or something that'll stand out. I did find out from carrying that pen down the street on my shoulder, very Stations of the Cross kind of scene, that women who had been in art school and were now married with families came out of their houses to caress the things. So, I'm telling you young fellas
Truth
out
comes
there,
out.
Yeah, so, no, that was just, I didn't realize what a powerful fetish item it would be. Actually, I made it because a man in England, an old man named Philip Poole, who ran a fantastic pen shop in London, told me that you couldn't make a pen longer than 4 inches that would work. And that roused my colonial ire, and I thought, "You're not going to tell me what to do, you whining." So I decided I would make one.
A wonderful performance piece, and actually he's doing some delightful works of art with this fairly large scale that I hope we will see exhibited sometime soon.
Yes.
If we haven't been to his house, I'll give you his address afterward. I won't either. You know, I sort of glossed over, you know, a lot of times history doesn't unfold in this linear manner that we want to, but in 1989, Fantagraphics Books moved to Seattle. I was at the time the curator and program director at the Center on Contemporary Art here. And as soon as I found out they moved here, I went to Peter Bagge's house for a reception and just started relentlessly pestering Gary and Kim to do this exhibition at Coca, because I am a comic book geek, and I just thought what they were doing was so profound. Love and Rockets literally ruined my life, changed my life, and it made me the successful guy that I am today. So this exhibition at the Center on Contemporary Art, Misfit Lit, was a term coined by our friend the late Dale Yarger, and with a catalog and poster designed by Daniel Klaus, genius cartoonist. Really sort of represented a kind of cementing Seattle as the new center of gravity in the alternative comics universe. We brought to town, you know, Gilbert and Jaime Hernandez, Daniel Klaus, Robert Crumb, Gilbert Paul Mavridis, of course Jim and Roberta. Just sort of everybody was here, and I think it was a cathartic event. We had this amazing panel discussion that I believe, Jim, you were a part of, where you were Crumb, sitting like this. Crumb, just for effect, fell over on the back of his chair, and just, you know, that changed the world. We're still feeling the reverberations of that chair falling over. You would have had to have been there, but it really was sort of a moment that established Seattle as a primal force in alternative comics. And again, I want to say that the foundation of this was laid by Cathy and Lynda and Charles and Matt, our other friends here in the Northwest, as well as Pete and Jim, who had preceded Fantagraphics here.
Can I tell a quick anecdote about that panel? Bert Hogarth, the legendary old school illustrator, was on that panel, and he was a little bit upset because he thought that the younger cartoonists were not justifying their existence by being able to explain what was deep and meaningful about their work and what their intent was. And when he posed that to Paul Mavridis, Paul said, well, whenever I draw a character, I have to decide whether I'm going to give him a big bag of money or drop him off a cliff. And I thought that was an epoch-making moment right there.
Indeed it was. So, 1989, I shortly thereafter left my prestigious position as a curator and went to work for several years as Fantagraphics. Well, my job title was beer tech, and I was exceedingly good at it. This is just related, once again, the Rocket, but Crumb was our featured guest at that show, and just prior to him moving to France and becoming a recluse and famous movie star, I just thought I'd point out Peter's rendition of Crumb and Michael Dugan's interview was just memorable. If you can find this issue, please do. You know, then there was a new generation of artists that were attracted to Seattle. I'm not sure exactly why they were attracted to Seattle. I don't think many of those people could tell you. I think at the time there was this emerging music scene, comics, and I think it was just a magnet for talented young cartoonists. And I was sitting, again, I was working as beer tech at Fantagraphics, and I was sitting at my desk, and Ellen Forney, I remember, wandered into the office and told me she was gonna move to Seattle and be a cartoonist, and I think I said something like, oh God, no, don't do that. You know, you're gonna starve to death and live in your basement. And now we have one of our proudest cartoonists in the Northwest. I'm just gonna introduce Ellen Forney. Thank you for ignoring my advice. I'll just sort of flip with some slides. This is going to be roughly chronological.
Here's Ellen.
And here's Ellen.
Well, I can talk about that moment and moving here.
Feel free. I barely remember that. You know, some people say the old yarn, if you remember the 60s, you weren't there. That applies to the 70s, 80s, and 90s with me. And I remember last year, sort of. Go ahead.
Well, I actually called you on the phone.
Oh, you did?
Yeah. I moved to Seattle in '89 after getting a degree in psychology, and worked here for a few years on a short-term involuntary psychiatric unit, and then decided that that wasn't the career for me, and that I needed to be a cartoonist, which freaked me out, and I moved out of the country. Actually, I moved to Taiwan. And then I moved back to Philadelphia, and then I started working up a portfolio. And I came out to Seattle for a couple of weeks after realizing that San Francisco really wasn't the Mecca anymore, that it was Seattle, that, you know, like looking in the back, like Michael Dugan, who Larry mentioned, that Michael Dugan was certainly a big influence on me, huge influence on me. We were talking about that before too, Cathy, who put out that East Texas book that I just read until it fell apart. which it did eventually, I'm sorry. Nothing against the printing or gluing of it. But there were so many cartoonists here, and so I went, and I didn't actually realize it at the time, but from calling and getting recommendations, I wound up visiting or talking on the phone with Justin Green and Diane Newman and Jim Woodring and Pete Bagge and Roberta Gregory, and I got a number of those numbers from you, Larry. I called up Fantagraphics because I dropped Jim Woodring's name. Jim Woodring suggested that I call you and then I just got so much support and encouragement. Here's my hint to you. If you want to go to somebody, whether it's a cartoonist or you want to be, I don't know, a paleontologist, and you get a hold of a master paleontologist, say that you want to talk about them. Don't say, I want to show you my stuff. Say, I want to talk with you about your stuff and bring your stuff. So that's what I wound up doing. And then I wound up staying in touch with those people. And when I moved back to Seattle, I had no idea what to do. Here, I'm a cartoonist now. I'm back with my new identity, and I have no idea what to do. And so I went out for coffee with Jim, who suggested that I pitch a cover to the stranger. And I sent you that cover. I don't know.
I think it's in here.
And it's going to come up at some point. Go back.
Well, how do I go back?
The arrows?
Is
The
there?
arrows.
Oh, now we're
Try the backspace.
backspace?
Try that one.
No.
No? Oh, you see, it says previous. That's what it is.
What do I do? Okay, she's gonna do it. Okay, very good.
There.
we go.
So this one on the left, that's from 1993. That's pretty much the first illustration that I did, and it kind of all went from there. There. How's that, Larry?
Good. Well, okay, we're gonna go. No, it's previous. Previous. We're gonna go back. You know what? How did you do that again? That's fine.
It was really amazing when I was getting together my stuff for this slideshow. Like, look back at your stuff from the early '90s. I mean, it was like when you were first starting out, and it was pretty wild thinking back at that time when we were all like, when it was underground. It was underground. Like, nobody says underground cartoonists, comics.
Well, you know, we call them all. You know, Peter sort of started calling them alternative comics because underground comics. It's referred to a specific era, I think, with me and the general public. You know, I've suggested that Peter coined the term alternative comics, and I've come to learn recently that that's not necessarily the case, but I think Peter's using the term alternative comics to associate with the alternative culture here in the Northwest that was just emerging before the lamentable term grunge had been applied.
But you know what? Alternative comics isn't really used all that much anymore.
It was for quite a while. It became sort of meaningless.
Right?
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be indie now?
Art comics.
Like Underground was a couple of incarnations ago.
You know, and I don't mind underground. You know, I've sort of come to embrace that now, as well as comics with an X, which I've rejected primarily because of Art Spiegelman and something. Hey, listen, I just wanted to, we're running a little behind because of our technical difficulties. I wanted to mention again, Ellen, this is one example of several of Ellen's association with the music scene here in Seattle in the 90s that was so prevalent. And then we're going to sort of quickly go through what I just thought was a brilliant series, Seattle's Erotic Landmarks. If you want to, you don't necessarily have to read this, but you know, this sort of goes to the Northwest noir aesthetic, or what Timothy Egan in the New York Times called, what was it? Seriously goofy. Go ahead. You want to just narrate this quickly?
Naughty, creepy, and a little funny. Naughty, creepy, and funny. That's our aesthetic here. Oh, I thought it actually started from the punchline, my idea for this comic, which was at the end, but maybe I won't have you go through all of that. But I had three erotic landmarks, and so I figured I would do a comic about it. So this is one downtown, the Penis Building. Everybody's familiar with the Penis Building.
Is that now the Municipal Tower?
Oh, who knows? It's the Penis Building.
The Penis Building,
But that's what it is.
You know, it was when it was built, it was actually called Fred Massetti's Last Erection.
Rigorous in it, here we go.
And this is the butthole sculpture. Anybody who's in Capitol Hill, I highly recommend that you go give it a visit at like 16th, between 15th and 16th and Denny and John. And it's this sculpture, and there's actually, you can stick your finger in the hole in the middle. And you know what, I had this idea that I found out it was, that it was sculpted by somebody who works at Group Health. And so I thought, you know, like it's this like this queer guy who put something over on Group Health, and it was this funny thing. And I called, and he was this guy who had this really heavy Russian accent and very serious about his sculpture. So I was hoping that he wasn't going to make a fuss, but I'm sure he doesn't read The Stranger.
Did you call it the butthole sculpture?
I did. I didn't say that. I just said that I really liked it. I wanted to ask him some questions about it. I just asked him some questions about it to kind of ascertain if I could put in any quotes or anything from him, and decided that I needed to absolutely not include him at all.
Very good.
Yeah.
We're going to just sort of...
Oh, and you didn't do the last
no,
one.
I didn't
The
use the last one. Yeah, I blame my IT assistant. My tech person is my 13-year-old daughter Bella, and she was getting tired about 2:30 last night. So
on Mercer, people who used to live in Seattle years ago, there was a gas flame building, and there was a gas flame in this shape that twirled, and it had like blue neon here and twinkles in the middle, and everybody that I knew referred to it as the magic pussy, and then I found out that other people called it the nuclear vagina. That was the punchline. So you'll have to I love Led Zeppelin if you're interested in taking a look at it.
And you can get that at booth 704, 1995. That's why we left it out. The punchline. I just want to remind Ellen that some of it's called the Washington Natural Gas Building. And you know, many of you know Ellen from her illustrations for Lust Lab, for the online kinky illustrations for these personal ads. Everybody knows these. I just thought I'd show one of the least offensive ones, but and if you want to see the more offensive ones, booth 704, ask for Lust. We'll sell it in a plain brown wrapper. You know, just I wanted to take the opportunity to plug Ellen's new book that's coming out in the fall from an imprint of Penguin, and I'll just let Ellen talk very briefly about this because we're running late again. Go ahead.
Okay, really quickly. So I have some postcards here, by the way. It is a book called, this is my first graphic novel, and actually, interestingly, it was Gary Groff who suggested years ago that I try doing a graphic novel, and at the time, I was like, no, I'm an essayist, but have wound up doing a graphic novel. It's 250 pages, the longest, hardest thing that I've ever done, for many reasons. It's called Marbles, Mania, Depression, Michelangelo, and Me. And it's about my experience of being bipolar. And in particular, what that's meant to me as being a visual artist who's bipolar. And so I bring in a bunch of, kind of to make sense of it, other artists and writers through history who have had mood disorders. And then I also did a ton of research about the correlation of mood disorders and creativity. So it was a really intense project for me, and I'm really proud of it. And that'll be out in November.
And on Penguin, what's the publisher actually name for
It's
it?
Gotham, which is
Gotham,
an imprint
yes.
of Penguin.
And Ellen put together a little dummy for us, and which you may be able to see at booth 704 after the presentation. We're going to move real quickly, but in 1993, I call 1993 the summer of hate. Again, I was beer tech at Fantagraphics, and one of my few responsibilities was answering the phone, and I got a phone call from, well, we got literally dozens of inquiries about being interns, which was very weird because, you know, it's like slave labor. And up until the summer of 1993, we get 1 or 2 calls, and it was usually some stoner that was just completely useless. And then we get deluged with all these calls from like, you know, all these fancy St. Lawrence College and, you know, all these Ivy League, you know, Princeton and Rutgers, and, you know, and to be interns, you want to work for free, come on out, you know. Can you lift a heavy keg of beer? One of the calls I got, in 1993, I actually referred to as the summer of hate. Seattle had just become a mecca for young people that come out, and you know, I think they all thought they were going to party with Eddie Vedder, and they came out and, you know, had a great time, and it was, I wish I could remember that, because I think it was fun. At any rate, one of the calls I got was from young Eric Reynolds, and he sounded like a strong young man that could sort of hustle around some beer for me. So, he was like willing to work free, and you're looking for a place to live. I think I connected him with Gary. He lived in Gary's basement, and
Right. Yep.
and
Actually, no, it wasn't the basement.
well, not the, he lived at Gary's house, and above ground at Gary's house. And here's a picture of, you know, once again, this recurring theme. He's in the Action Sits a band with Peter Bagge and another young cartoonist. I'm sorry, Andy Schmidt, of course. And I'm going to allow Eric to sort of talk about some of the younger cartoonists, because I don't know a lot of this guy's not really young anymore, but some of you probably heard of Ed Brubaker. He writes for, I think he does Captain America now, but he's done Batman. He's become very successful, and in the mainstream comic world. But you know, at that era, he was doing alternative comics. Megan Kelso, who was like just a wonderful, amazing artist, who was largely associated with the Riot Girl movement, and a lot of zines and self-published comics, and now collected, which you can get at Booth 704. And Fantagraphics. Well, a delightful artist in just these wonderful period pieces. This is David Lasky and Greg Stumpf's effort, Urban Hipster, that was sort of, it's very period and sort of real cute. He just finished, I understand he just turned into, I think it was Little Brown, that publishing the Carter family book that should be out probably about the same time as Ellen's. And I'm just going to sort of allow Eric very briefly to sort of discuss, he's the associate publisher now. He went from assistant beer tech to one of the triumvirate.
Assistant beer tech to official paid apologist.
There you go. Go ahead. If you want to talk just a little bit about what's happening now and maybe what you anticipate as the future of comics in the Northwest.
Well, all I would say is that, and Jim could actually probably speak to this as better or as well as I, that I think that it's actually, this right now is about as closest as anything I've seen in Seattle to when I moved here in 1993, as far as there just being kind of a vitality of cartooning. Last night I went to this art opening in Ballard, to bring it all full circle, the space for Coca, which Larry used to run, that was an opening for this tabloid called The Intruder, produced by a bunch of local cartoonists. And
it's free, and you can get it at Booth 704.
And even this tabloid's good, but this art show was really fantastic, I thought. And there was a lot of really great cartooning going on, the likes of which I haven't seen in a while, which was, and this is something that I personally respond to, which is just this kind of like obsessive mark making and just sort of drawing for drawing's sake. And sometimes there's not necessarily even a ton of content per se, in as much as they have some incredibly meaningful or important thing to say, but it's just enjoying drawing for drawing's sake and drawing for your own sake. And hoping other people like it. And there are cartoonists like Max Klottfelter and Jason Miles and Ben Horak and Nikki Birch. Those are just some of the folks who are in, Mark Palm, that are in this anthology. And I was just really, this was just last night, and I just went because I live in Ballard and it's in my neighborhood, and I wasn't necessarily expecting very much, and I actually thought it was a really kind of inspiring show. The end.
Yeah, sadly, because we got a late start, I might take one question real quickly. Does anybody have one? Otherwise, we can just informally discuss this at booth 704 in the exhibition room. And while I have the captive audience, I thought I would mention our Emerald City Pinball Party we're having tomorrow night. It's hosted by Jim Woodring, and we're going to give away this backlash to a forthcoming Jim Woodring pinball machine that's currently in production, and a lot of other great prizes. And we expect a visit from Camille Rose Garcia. And please come and enjoy yourself. It's free. Oh, the pinball contest is for the worst player, the lowest score.
Yes!
So if you suck, you're going to do just fine. All right, it'll be great fun tomorrow at Shorty's right after the convention, 7 to 10 p.m. Free, 21 and over. Thanks for coming. Sorry for the delay.